Hope you've got your thinking caps ready to go.
Absolutely, yeah, ready to jump in.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Sip and Talk.
Great to be here.
So today we're tackling a really big one, something I think a lot of us have been wondering about. What's the deal with Taiwan's future, you know? And to help us sort of wrap our heads around it, we're looking at things from the perspective of Jeffrey Wasserstrom. He's a historian who's really well done his own deep dive into modern China.
Yeah, Wasserstrom offers some really useful insights, especially when you consider how China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan all kind of fit together, or maybe don't fit together sometimes.
Right.
He helps us see how those relationships have shifted and what that might actually mean down the road.
Exactly. And he also touches on like a whole bunch of other important things related to China, which kind of gives us a much broader picture. Don't worry, though. We're going to break it all down, keep it easy to follow.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's unpack this. So first things first, who exactly is Jeffrey Wasserstrom? Why should we be listening to his take?
Okay, so Jeffrey Wasserstrom, he's a pretty well-known historian, specializes in modern China. He's got a really solid grasp of the social, cultural, political forces over there. And for our chat today, we're mainly pulling from a really interesting conversation he had on a Lex Fridman podcast. Lots of good stuff in there.
Got it. So he knows his stuff.
Yep. Okay,
now let's get into this whole intertwined relationship between China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan from his point of view. What's this sort of core idea we need to get?
Well, what's really interesting is how this one country, two systems idea, the one that was set up for Hong Kong's handover back in 1997, how that connects or was supposed to connect to Taiwan.
Right.
And it's super important to remember that in 97, sovereignty over Hong Kong was actually transferred to the PRC. It wasn't quite given back, like some people frame it.
How so?
Because the 99-year lease on the new territories ran out. And that land was part of the Qing Empire before the British took it. And those new territories were vital, absolutely essential for Hong Kong's resources, water, everything. So the whole territory had to go together. It wasn't just about the island.
Ah, okay. So it wasn't just some symbolic gesture of returning territory. Practical necessity.
Exactly. Very practical. And then Beijing sort of held up the Hong Kong model and said, hey, Taiwan, look over here, right?
Yeah, wasn't that the pitch? See how well this worked?
It was basically it. Beijing was saying, look, things are going pretty smoothly in Hong Kong. This one country, two systems, it could be a good framework for you guys, for future reunification. It was presented as a kind of potential roadmap.
Well, things didn't exactly stay smooth in Hong Kong, did they? This is where it starts getting really interesting.
No, they really didn't. Over time, and especially after maybe 2008 or so, a lot of people in Hong Kong started feeling like Beijing was kind of chipping away at the two systems part.
Right.
There was this growing feeling that their unique lifestyle, their autonomy, was being eroded.
And that feeling eventually blew up into some pretty major protests, didn't it? I definitely remember seeing that unfold.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Big time. During the 2014 protests, the Umbrella Movement, there were banners, I remember this clearly, with a really blunt warning aimed straight at Taiwan. It just said, look at Hong Kong.
Wow. Direct.
Yeah. It was basically saying, don't trust the promises. A clear signal that maybe that high degree of autonomy wasn't quite as guaranteed as Beijing had made it sound. Like a real-time cautionary tale playing out right next door.
It's like watching your neighbor sign a contract and then seeing the terms change.
Exactly like that. And Wasserstrom draws this interesting comparison, right, between Deng Xiaoping, who kind of orchestrated the handovers of Hong Kong and Macau, and Xi Jinping now. You could almost argue, maybe, that Xi has sort of finished the job in Hong Kong, in a way, by really reducing its distinctiveness from the mainland.
So Hong Kong ends up being less of a model for Taiwan and more of a warning. Or maybe even a test case for Beijing.
That raises a huge question, doesn't it? Is Taiwan the sort of logical next step for Beijing? Or, maybe Xi Jinping feels that other actions, like expanding influence in the South China Sea, are enough to cement his legacy.
Right, like maybe there are other ways to project power.
Exactly. It's like he might have a few different avenues to make his mark, historically speaking. It's not necessarily just about Taiwan.
And it really sounds like what went down in Hong Kong has significantly shifted how people in Taiwan view the whole situation.
I think that's a really key point for you, the listener, to take away. The events in Hong Kong have likely played a big part in strengthening this sense of a distinct Taiwanese identity.
Makes sense.
Seeing Hong Kong's autonomy diminish has just made the idea of closer ties with the PRC way less attractive for many people in Taiwan. I mean, why would you want to sign up for something when you've seen it go sideways for someone else?
Yeah, totally logical. Okay, let's shift focus slightly. What does Wasserstrom say about the actual possibility of military action against Taiwan? That's kind of the elephant in the room, isn't it?
It really is the question on everyone's mind. And Wasserstrom acknowledges that Xi Jinping has placed this huge emphasis on the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. And unification with Taiwan is framed as a core part of that.
Right, it's central to the narrative.
Definitely. And the Hong Kong situation, that erosion of one country, two systems, it absolutely casts a long shadow over any Taiwanese hopes for a peaceful resolution based on similar promises. Trust is low.
And I guess the war in Ukraine must have factored into Beijing's thinking, too.
Oh, absolutely. You have to assume the international reaction to Russia's invasion of Ukraine was watched very closely in Beijing.
Like taking notes?
Pretty much. They'd be analyzing the costs, the sanctions, the global alignment. All of it feeds into their calculus about Taiwan, the potential risks and rewards of any kind of military action. It's a live case study.
Wow.
And what's fascinating, historically, Wasserstrom points out, is that way back, both Chiang Kai-shek on Taiwan and Mao Zedong on the mainland, despite being bitter enemies, actually agreed that Taiwan and the mainland were ultimately destined to be united.
Huh, that's ironic.
Isn't it?
Mm.
But that historical argument, that shared destiny idea, it just doesn't hold the same weight in Taiwan today. The sense of separate identity is much stronger now.
So appealing to that shared history doesn't really land anymore.
Not in the same way, no. And Wasserstrom suggests that maybe a specific fixed military plan for Taiwan isn't quite as set in stone as some observers might think.
Oh.
It might be more fluid, more dependent on Beijing's assessment of the costs versus the benefits at any given time, maybe even linked to domestic stability inside China itself. So it's less about a predetermined timeline and more about a constant, complex calculation.
A calculation with huge global stakes.
Exactly. And he also brings up the whole idea of gray zone tactics. This is really important.
What are those exactly?
These are actions China could take that fall short of an actual military invasion, but still put intense pressure on Taiwan. Think cyber attacks, economic coercion, disinformation campaigns, constant military drills nearby.
Ah, like turning up the heat slowly without actually starting a war.
Precisely. Making life difficult, trying to wear Taiwan down or influence its politics without firing a shot.
Yeah, okay.
And then you zoom out again and you look at the sheer economic interconnectedness. I mean, the world's reliance on Taiwan's TSMC for advanced semiconductor chips. That's huge.
Right, the chips in basically everything electronic.
Everything. And that acts as a potentially massive disincentive for military action. Wasserstrom mentions this funny but smart point someone made, I think it was Han, about how attacking Taiwan and disrupting TSMC would be like shooting yourself and the entire global tech industry in the foot.
Yeah, the don't mess with the iPhone supply chain argument.
Kind of. So when you ask what it all means for military action, it's just this incredibly complex mix of historical claims, political ambitions, economic realities, and international factors. Definitely no simple yes or no.
No easy answers at all. Okay, so Wasserstrom covered a lot more ground in that interview. Can we maybe get a quick rundown of some of the other key themes he touched on, just to round out the picture?
Yeah, definitely. To give you a broader sense.
Yeah.
Okay, Xi Jinping and Mao, he compares with both obviously built up these powerful personality cults, right?
Right.
But their styles are really different. Mao, Wasserstrom suggests, almost seemed to revel in chaos, using upheaval to push change forward. Xi, on the other hand, is all about order, stability, control.
Interesting contrast.
And Xi has also embraced Confucianism, hierarchy, social harmony, which Mao totally rejected as old feudal thinking. So you have these two dominant figures, but with pretty different approaches and even philosophies.
Two strong leaders, very different methods. Okay, what about education? That came up too, right?
Yeah, education is huge in China, partly thanks to that Confucian legacy, big emphasis on learning, meritocracy, the idea you can rise based on ability. Think of the old imperial civil service exams, and today you have the Gaokao, that incredibly intense college entrance exam.
The ultimate meritocracy test in theory.
In theory. But Wasserstrom points out there's always been this tension with nepotism, cronyism, who your family knows, sometimes mattering more than what you know. And that frustration, that sense the meritocratic ideal was being undermined by corruption and privilege, was actually a major factor fueling the Tiananmen Square protests back in 1989.
Ah, so that anger about fairness was part of it.
A big part. People felt the system wasn't living up to its own promises.
That tension between the ideal and reality seems a pretty common everywhere. And Tiananmen Square itself, what was the core issue there, according to Wasserstrom?
He frames the 1989 movement largely as an effort by students, intellectuals, and others to push the Communist Party to actually live up to its own stated goals of reform and opening up, especially politically.
So, not necessarily to overthrow the party.
Not primarily, no. It happened against the backdrop of communism collapsing in Eastern Europe, which maybe confused some outside observers. But inside China, many participants felt the economic liberalization wasn't being matched by needed political reforms. They wanted the party to be better, more responsive, less corrupt, more reform, not necessarily revolution.
Got it. Holding them accountable to their own rhetoric. Okay, the big C censorship. How does Wasserstrom describe how that works in China?
Right. He talks about it being multi-layered. You can think of it using this framework: fear, friction, and flooding.
Fear, friction, flooding. Okay.
Fear is the obvious part, outright banning of sensitive topics or materials. Friction means making disapproved information harder to find or access, slowing it down, making it inconvenient. And flooding is basically overwhelming the internet and media with the government's preferred narratives and distractions.
Wow. That's comprehensive.
It is. And interestingly, he notes, you can sometimes find classic works critical of totalitarianism, like Orwell's 1984, available in China, as long as they aren't seen as directly criticizing China itself. The censorship is tightest around critiques of current or past Chinese leaders and specific events like Tiananmen or the Cultural Revolution. Wasserstrom even makes this comparison between Orwell's 1984 and Huxley's Brave New World.
Right, control through pain versus control through pleasure and distraction.
Exactly. And he notes Huxley's vision might be more relevant in some ways. And get this, the parts of Huxley's later book, Brave New World Revisited, that specifically mention China, those parts are censored in mainland Chinese editions.
No way. That's incredible irony.
Tells you a lot, doesn't it?
Definitely. Okay, what about safety for journalists working there? Seems like a tough gig.
Yeah, he says it's become increasingly difficult and complex.
Yeah.
Journalists who are ethnic Chinese or those seen as amplifying dissident voices seem to face particular risks. Wasserstrom mentions that he himself, despite writing critical things over the years, was still able to get visas for a long time, but he senses that space is shrinking, things are tightening up. And the case of the Hong Kong booksellers who published sensitive political books and then disappeared, only to reappear in mainland custody. That's a really chilling example.
Yeah, that sent shockwaves. So a much more precarious environment now.
Seems that way, yes.
And the trade war, the U.S.-China tensions, Wasserstrom's take.
He really emphasizes the historical backdrop, this idea of China's century of humiliation, feeling bullied by foreign powers in the 19th and early 20th centuries. That narrative is still incredibly powerful inside China.
Right, that history looms large.
Very large.
Yeah.
And it fuels this strong sense of national pride and a determination not to be pushed around now.
Yeah.
So current trade disputes get filtered through that historical lens.
Yeah.
He also stresses that it's not just a U.S.-China thing. You have to look at the whole global picture. Other countries are key players too.
It's a multi-sided game, not just two players facing off.
I just want to give another shout out to Micky from Mickytolife. His channel is a treasure trove of inspiration, and he's a huge Sip&Talk fan.
Absolutely. Make sure to check him out and maybe even share your awesome podcast intro with him once you've created it. Okay, back to Hong Kong for a sec. Those huge protests in 2019, did they come out of nowhere?
Not according to Wasserstrom. He points out that major protests often build on earlier ones. Activists learn tactics, build networks. He highlights generation as a key factor. Younger people feeling the potential long-term impacts of changes, like creeping mainlandization, much more acutely.
Right.
So you had earlier protests, like in 2012, against proposed patriotic education curricula, then the 2014 umbrella movement over voting rights. These paved the way for the massive 2019 protests against the extradition bill.
And the scale of 2019 was just enormous.
Staggering. Millions of people in a city of just over 7 million. It was proportionally huge. And while the protesters were largely focused on defending Hong Kong's existing rule of law and autonomy, the government's response, as we know, was ultimately to clamp down hard.
A real turning point, no doubt. What about the unpredictability of these kinds of movements? Does history offer any lessons there?
Yeah, he makes the point that history is full of surprises. Things that seem impossible can happen quickly. Look at Eastern Europe in 1989.
True.
And even movements that seem to fail in the short term can have really long-lasting impacts. They plant seeds, inspire future generations, create enduring symbols like the idea of a Hong Kong spirit that lives on, even in the diaspora. He also mentions this concept of another China.
What's that?
Sort of a broader, more cosmopolitan, diverse idea of what it means to be Chinese, existing alongside and sometimes challenging the official state narrative. It's a reminder that identities and societies are rarely monolithic.
That's a really interesting idea, the other China. Okay, let's rewind way back. How did Mao actually come to power? It feels like such a pivotal moment.
Well, it followed a period of immense chaos in China. The emperors fell in 1911. The republic that followed was weak and fragmented. You had the rise of two main parties, the nationalists, led by Chiang Kai-shek, and the communists.
Aren't they allies at first?
Briefly, yeah. But then Chiang turned on the communists in a bloody purge in 1927. What set Mao apart was his focus on mobilizing the peasants in the countryside, rather than just urban workers like traditional Marxists expected.
A different strategy.
A crucial difference. Later, they formed another uneasy alliance, the Second United Front, to fight against the Japanese invasion during World War II. But as soon as Japan surrendered, the civil war between the nationalists and communists flared up again.
And the communists won.
They did. By 1949, they had taken control of the mainland, and Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalists retreated to Taiwan. And here's another historical twist. Jiang emphasized Confucian traditions, while Mao initially rejected them fiercely. Now fast forward to Xi Jinping.
And he's bringing Confucianism back into the fold alongside one-party rule.
Exactly. Trying to synthesize elements that his predecessors kept separate. History keeps echoing.
It really does. Okay, then came the Great Leap Forward under Mao.
Just devastating, right? Horrific. It was this utopian radical attempt to rapidly collectivize agriculture and boost industrial output overnight. But it was based on flawed ideas and terrible planning.
And led to famine.
A catastrophic famine. Estimates range, but somewhere between 30 and 45 million people are thought to have died from starvation and related causes. Part of the tragedy was that local officials were terrified to report failures up the chain to Mao.
So the leadership didn't even know how bad it was.
Or didn't want to know. Bad information flow, combined with Mao's unrealistic vision, it was just an immense disaster, a period of unimaginable suffering.
Truly awful. So given catastrophes like that and later the Cultural Revolution, how is Mao's legacy actually viewed in China today?
Well, for a long time after Mao's death, the official party line was kind of summed up as him being 70% right, 30% wrong, a way to acknowledge the mistakes without totally repudiating the founder. But under Xi Jinping, there's been more emphasis on continuity. The idea is that China's current strength builds on both the Mao era and the reform era that followed. Xi tends to highlight the aspects of Mao's legacy related to unifying the country and building national strength, while downplaying the chaotic, destructive periods like the Great Leap Forward or the Cultural Revolution.
So a selective emphasis, framing it to support the current narrative of national rejuvenation.
Pretty much, yeah. Aligning with the parts of Mao's legacy that fit the story of China standing up and becoming strong again.
Right. And finally, bringing it back around, how does Taiwan perceive everything that's happened in Hong Kong? It must have a huge impact on their thinking.
Oh, absolutely massive. Taiwan's perspective on Hong Kong is crucial. Seeing how Beijing handled the one country, two systems promised there, how autonomy was curtailed, it's deeply undermined any trust that similar promises would be honored for Taiwan.
Understandably.
Many, probably most, people in Taiwan feel their democratic way of life is fundamentally different from the mainland system, and Hong Kong's experience just reinforces that feeling. Plus, there's a real sense of connection and solidarity among activists across the region. People in Taiwan watched Hong Kong closely, and vice versa.
Okay, wow. That is a lot to take in. But Wasserstrom really helps connect the dots. It's so clear these issues are incredibly complex, deeply historical, and just massively important.
Absolutely. And understanding these different threads, these perspectives and histories is really essential if you want to get any kind of handle on what's happening now and what might, happen next in that part of the world.
Well, that's our deep dive for today. I hope you found that as eye-opening as we did. And hey, if you want more of this kind of stuff, more brain food delivered straight to your ears,
you know what to do.
Make sure you hit that subscribe button for the deep dive. Seriously, it helps us out.
It really does.
And while you're clicking things, maybe go check out our old buddy Micky's YouTube channel. He's still out there fighting the good fight against the algorithm.
Chuckles, is he winning yet?
Last I saw, his cat compilation had more views than his explanation of string theory, so maybe. Go give him some love anyway.
Always good for a laugh. if nothing else.
Thanks so much for diving deep with us today. We really appreciate you tuning in and sticking with us through all of that complexity.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
And just to leave you with something to chew on, thinking about everything Wasserstrom laid out, what do you think is the biggest unknown, the real wild card, in this ongoing story involving China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan? Something to ponder until next time.